I think we are at quite a dynamic point in human evolution right now.
You bet.
And it's a very, very interesting time that we're living in, and there's a lot going on, a lot of levels. And I think there is a pushback, so it's hard times to navigate. And we have groups of people who are really looking for, where are those breakthrough points? Where are those areas where we can make a difference, where we can make a visible difference that is empowering, that becomes self-generating, that pulls people in by its energy and its positivity and its potential for moving forward and creating that beautiful world that our hearts know is possible, that world where we are connected, where we are in harmony with our environment, where we're protecting our biosphere, which keeps us alive, where we can bring out the best and share what we have so that there's enough, so we don't have people falling through the cracks, so that children are safe and fed. So, coming back more almost to that sort of village way of looking at things.
Hi, this is Bruce Lipton, and you're listening to Green Planet FM.
Kia ora, greetings, and welcome to Green Planet FM 104.6. I'm Tim Lynch, and I trust that you are doing well. I invite you to stay with me over the next hour as we discuss and find ways to take care of our unique and magnificent green planet Earth. On the fringes of cities and even close to city centres and in towns and villages across New Zealand, there is a gathering impetus for the relocalisation of people committed to work together, communicate, share, and do business based on goodwill and win-win outcomes. These growing number of aware New Zealanders are realising that the corporate era is grinding on towards a very uncertain future, not only for our civilization, but the whole biosphere as well. So as a result of thinking globally but acting locally, these thoughtful New Zealanders are taking an in-breath and renewing their focus on what is happening in their neighbourhood and in particular to their local community. This relocalisation of group energy is unfolding many innovative ideas and models of working in collaboration. As previously mentioned in other greenplanetfm.com interviews, a lot of focus is based around farmers markets, food growing, organics, permaculture, time banks, buying and selling, and cooperating at numerous innovative tiers and levels. Some are using social media like Give a Little or Kickstarter or Pledge Me to start businesses, and the result is that the pledges within the community can become shareholders in that community construction, like shops. This gives locals a stake in what is happening in their immediate area. The aim is wishing to share at a deeper level values that are expressed from the heart and from a place of honesty and courage. On the phone from Diamond Harbour, near Littleton in the South Island, I have Anneleise Hall. And Anneleise, in a previous interview a number of years ago, gave a very good overview of what was happening on the west coast of the South Island and the way community comes together on all the different things within a community, from transition everything, farmers markets, time banks, permaculture, holistic health, homeschooling, garage sales and food buying co-ops. Communities are on the move now. They realise that they need connection. We all need connection. And at heart, we want to be able to communicate closer to our neighbour and feel safe and have our children grow up in a world that is both harmonious and peaceful. Because, and the bigger picture is quite frightening, but locally here in New Zealand, we can make for our children a lovely community where they can play and enjoy living. And so, kia ora, Anneleise, thank you for taking your valuable time to want to give us an idea of what's happening here in the greater mix of a broader perspective of community, neighbourhood building, and I appreciate you coming on.
Kia ora, Tim. Thank you for having me. I think there's definitely a lot happening around New Zealand, and it's only increasing over the years. I started getting involved with sort of alternative systems 20 years ago now, and seeing what's emerged over the last couple of decades, gently and gradually, I admit, has been quite heartening. And there's a lovely phrase by a guy called Charles Eisenstein that I like, and it's creating the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. And as you say, we are in a world where we're bombarded with fairly horrific news daily from all around the world, whether it's people moving away from war and trashed cities, trying to find somewhere safe to live, the massive refugee migrations, and we're certainly seeing some major unrest in the United States at the moment. Hard to really know what's going on there or how far that will go. So there's been this kind of what I consider quite a polarity going on in the world, where on the one hand you've got the rise of fear and nationalism and quite divisive politics, and then on the other hand you've got this movement of sort of the antidote movement to that, where you've got people going, well, actually that's not who we are, that doesn't align with our values. We want to be inclusive and friendly and embrace all our people and work together for a better outcome for everyone. So you've got this real divided camps. I think people who fear the loss of a life that might not even be quite a reality in the first place. Certainly the nationalist movements that we've seen over history haven't had particularly great outcomes economically or long-term for people. And, and then we've got this rising inequality where a handful of people own 50% of the world's wealth and resources, which is quite startling when you look at it like that. So we've got a whole heap of people who are doing all right, and then a whole heap more people who are struggling to get through each day with very little security for the future, So that in itself is quite fear-inducing when people don't know if they're going to be able to feed their kids or have a roof over their head, or if there'll be meaningful work available, or if the type of work that they're trained in will still exist, because things are changing so fast. So, we are in a world of rapid change. And the other thing that we really need to look at is energy. Our industrial revolution and growth as we know it and all of those things have been pretty much built on the back of having cheap, available energy, which has come in the form of fossil fuels, and that is depleting. We've reached a tipping point with the amount of energy that we can extract, and what it actually costs to extract that energy is starting to reach a point where the viability of extracting that energy and the profit that is able to be made from it is reducing quite significantly. So we are no longer going to have those sort of options to be running on that cheap energy to fuel the kind of GDP growth economically that we've been looking at globally for the last 30 or 40 years. So we're really reaching quite a grab and a tipping point in how we manage ourselves and our planet, and that's something that's really impacting right from the top levels right down to the bottom in a lot of ways. And we're seeing it here in New Zealand, the neoliberal experiment, where we've got record homelessness, record mental illness, record suicides, record violence.
Prisons.
Yeah, prisons are full. You've got the highest level of incarceration that we've ever had. So that's not what I would call indicators for a really healthy country. So, we need to look at, if we don't want to continue on that path, if we want to build a nation where there is opportunity and well-being as a foundation for all our people, we need to look at where we're going wrong, where we've missed the boat on some of those indicators that things aren't working along the track, and then how do we start to change the way that we're doing things that isn't exacerbating those problems, that's actually starting to mitigate them. So that's a really big picture
Very good.
that's going around everywhere at the moment. And, it's there is real fear in our communities for people just getting through each day. And the thing is that, you know, when we're forced into that level of survival mode, it's really not healthy. It starts to amp up all our stress hormones, which is why we've seen that increases in depression and anxiety, certainly in some people. It's very hard to contribute to your community if you're transient, if you have to move all the time, if you can't get secure housing. And, you know, if you don't have enough to live on each week and you're scraping by or have 3 or 4 jobs just to try and top everything up. I mean, we're at the point now in New Zealand where families a number of years ago on one income could secure a home. And, you know, now we've got 2 parents working with children and
they still
the housing's
can't.
just not available.
Yes.
So, you know, and there's a number of things that have fed into that. You know, we've had quite high immigration where we haven't had any real planning around infrastructure and
True.
availability to keep up. The government sort of was selling state houses. The previous government was selling state houses instead of building them. So some of our more marginalised people that have always needed, you know, more assistance haven't been receiving that assistance. They've been falling through the cracks. So what we're hitting is sort of several crisis points that have got no real easy fix, you know, and even though we've got a new government now, you know, they can't walk in with, you know, bags of money that aren't there and make everything happen overnight. So it's really about sort of how do we come together as a community and work on multiple level solutions from grassroots right up to the top. You know, and we've seen that with our marae, taking people in short term and trying to feed people and connect them with services. Services, I think, were quite encouraged to not help certain people under the previous government, which made all those problems a lot worse. It meant people got to way more overextended levels of stress, which makes it so much harder to come back from and form that stable foundation. I mean, I think what we really need to look at is we're really in quite a traumatised world at the moment. We've just had really shock after shock after shock. I think that's what's underpinning the rise of this nationalism, this fear-based politics. People are fearing not having enough, not being able to feed their kids, not being able to have a house, so they're trying to kind of nail it down for them by excluding other groups that they feel are a threat or making that pot have to stretch further around. And that makes it ripe for people who want to play on those fears to consolidate and gain power. So really starting to look at how do we move away from this fear-based not enough and start to create abundance through the resources, social capital, innovation and potential in our people and communities, because I think we are at quite a dynamic point in human evolution right now.
You bet.
And it's a very, very interesting time that we're living in, and there's a lot going on, a lot of levels. And I think there is a pushback from just basic, decent people who recognise that there are problems but aren't willing to be ruled by fear over those problems, that want that space and that encouragement and to generate that collective positivity to really move to something better and more inclusive and more empowering for the collective. I think we're definitely, it's almost that George Bush said during 9/11, you're with us or you're against us. It's sort of like, I think we've got quite that division where we've got a whole group of people that want to try and make things better for everyone, and then we've got people who just want to grab everything they can and make sure that they're sorted. So it's hard times to navigate, and we have groups of people who are really looking for where are those breakthrough points, where are those areas where we can make a difference, where we can make a visible difference that is empowering, that becomes self-generating, that pulls people in by its energy and its positivity and its potential for moving forward and creating that beautiful world that our hearts know is possible, that world where we are connected, where we are in harmony with our environment, where we're protecting our biosphere, which keeps us alive, where we can bring out the best and share what we have so that there's enough, so we don't have people falling through the cracks, so that children are safe and fed. So, coming back more almost to that sort of village way of looking at things.
Yes, this is really fantastic. When you get people working together, innovation and creativity come into it. And then, not only that, real inspirational bright sparks can lay out something that we didn't even think. Just the coming together of certain people can actually spark a conversation that takes us into another level of synergy of how we can actually do business and work together. And I think the excitement of being with a group of people and you know how to work cohesively with each other brings out more creative ideas.
I agree, Tim. And I think that chaos is a great mother of invention, and we're definitely in times of chaos. But what we're seeing emerging through these times is some amazing social entrepreneurs.
Yes.
The term social entrepreneur was really not existent a number of years ago, and now it's sort of become the new emerging, particularly from our younger generations who, there've been a lot of bagging of the younger generations about Generation Me, but I actually find that younger people have a much more
openness,
higher level of awareness about how everything is connected, about how when we destroy our water or don't have land that's so loaded with nitrates that it can't produce food without a heap of fertiliser and other nutrients gets depleted. When we start to look at cities that aren't walkable or livable or don't have public transport or aren't connected, when we start to look at our food chain and the welfare of animals and how we're producing things, I think there's a level of kind of ethics that's coming through in our younger generations.
Yes.
It's sort of reclaiming ethics, It's sort of like we kind of got really a bit bewitched, I think, by this massive consumer hit that we've had for the last 30 or 40 years where everything's, easy, throw away, pick it up in the supermarket, one-use, single-use plastics. We went from the old paper bags that I can still remember from my childhood where plastic, everything just didn't come pre-wrapped and everything's sort of been about convenience. But really it's a lot about how do you make and extract profit. So much of this throwaway one-use stuff we've had is just useless ideas that last 2 minutes or that are making someone money. And this is just growth at all costs. How do we come up with new products that we can keep making profits, so we can keep having growth, so we can keep upping GDP and we can keep this perpetual cycle going to prop up an economic system that relies on growth because it's money created through interest-bearing debt. So, of course, there's no money created to pay the interest, so we need to keep sustained growth to keep servicing a whole economy that's based on debt. So, we could very well have to move away from that system, and there's certainly been a lot of murmurings from the World Bank and the IMF and other fairly high-level economic kind of commentators about the money system is unsustainable. It's going to fall over. We've got more debt than we've got money, and we're looking for another big financial crisis looming up because everything has just been going the same old as it was before the last one. So history does repeat itself, and we're in this cycle of, I think, contraction because this growth at all costs has been pretty much reliant on, as I said before, being able to produce cheap energy, which we aren't anymore. And so much of what we use, all of our plastics, all of our fertilisers, our transport, it's all based on petrochemicals, fossil fuels, and
it's time for a change.
It's coming to an end, and some of the alternatives that are potential to replace these things like hemp.
Good. Tell us more. Tell us more.
Well, New Zealand's way behind the 8 ball on hemp. For me personally, I think particularly with our dairy industry that's been propping up these huge industrial farms and then we're looking at pretty significant mismanagement of money and investment overseas to try and kind of boost our profits, but it's been losing them. Some of the Fonterra investments have proven to be very shonky, and so we've got this massive industry of which New Zealand's reliant on, particularly with industrial dairying, where we've converted a lot of unsuitable land, which has required irrigation, which has destroyed waterways through over-extraction and leaching. when we could be looking at crops like hemp that have multiple uses right across. There's a lot of things that can be manufactured. They can be used for biofuels, and they're actually also good for regenerating land.
You bet.
So I think that there has been a real invested interest in sort of sustaining business as usual without real vision and leadership and diversification for best long-term interests and sustainability. And I think we're in this quite chaotic period. And another CBD oil, which is a cannabis-derived medicinal oil. We now have a social enterprise startup in the North Island in Ruatoria, which has been very
depressed
and struggling for industry and
30 years.
Employment and opportunities. And now we've got this new wee startup that would really like to be on the model of a social enterprise, all going to plan. But it's really looking at how innovative is the government going to be, how proactive are they going to be, how forward-thinking are they going to be out of this war on drugs mindset, which was basically a racial profiling exercise that we've kind of ended up with a hangover from in colonial New Zealand. And then we get guys like Monsanto who've just been taken over by Bayer, which is like we've got this huge multinational company that wants to start patenting some of these strains, whereas in New Zealand, I mean, what I look in Ruatoria is some of those people have been growing pot all their lives, but now they actually
yes.
get to do something that helps people. I mean, there is a lot of research coming through now about medicinal benefits, particularly for people with terminal illness, for people with epilepsy, for people with conditions that just the drug treatments that are out there are really, really debilitating, really nasty, make people sicker than they help, and it's a really viable alternative. So,
yes.
I mean, as a starting point for where do we position ourselves in this industry, and for the fact that we've got a whole heap of people who have been traditionally sort of highly employed that are experts. Why aren't we harnessing our social capital? I mean, it seems instead of filling our prisons with young fellas who are growing pot, why don't we fill our horticultural facilities with them and create really high-grade, world-class products that help people?
Yeah.
It's how do we start thinking outside the square and stop sort of, I mean, realistically, supporting business as usual and the status quo has led to 8 or so people controlling 50% of the world's wealth. I mean, that's ridiculous. I think we need to really start supporting things that really start looking at redistribution and wider opportunity.
Good. Now, can I cut in here? Yes. Well, look, hemp is a wonderful way for New Zealanders, particularly if we get into the federated farmers. We've got to get rid of the top management of federated farmers and get young people in there saying, right, let's see if we can take this to the New Zealand farmers very, very fast. We also need to get government in there to be behind them. There's enough good scientists, believe it or not. We've got many scientific Crown Research Institutes, and these are Hort and Food Research and the New Zealand Institute of Crop and Food Research. I think there's one Ag Research, all part of the New Zealand government. So we've got all these skills, these scientific people who can become a little bit more innovative in the natural realm. Really get in behind there, and that's only hemp. I mean, sure, you've heard of other things too, Anneleise, and can you extend this?
So, as I mentioned before, I think that we're in a time of kind of contraction, where we're not going to have the energy and fuel resources available. I do think that constant growth reached limits. So what we need to look at is housing security, food security. What are the basic human needs? If we come back to what are the basic things that our people need for a quality of life. So one of the really big movements that's sort of been going on around New Zealand is relocalising food production. I mean, this is starting to emerge through growers' markets and farmers' markets and food forests and planting fruit trees on council land and parks. And there's been some really exciting things, particularly in Christchurch, because after the earthquakes there was a huge heap of land that was just written off, that was red zone, that would never be able to be built on again. So there's all of the fruit trees that were left from the houses have been pulled down. People can forage all through there. And there are also massive community orchard and food forest programs just happening. And the interesting thing is all it takes is one champion in the community to stand up and go, I want to do this, and then they put the word out, and then maybe they've got 3 or 4 people, and then they just begin. And they might have $500 from council or support from a few locals or run a Give a Little page or whatever. But these projects are happening so quickly once they start to get a bit of momentum, once they start to get the word out there. And they're pulling people together. They're pulling people together over shared and common interests, or just it's a way you can get down to your local park, plant a few fruit trees, have a bit of a natter and a potluck with other people. It's a way to start taking responsibility and having some investment in your community, meeting your needs. So the same with these time banks that are starting up, or exchange systems, community education programs, ways of coming together and sharing ideas, sharing company, ways of feeling like you can contribute and be part of your community and be part of the solution. So there are so many communities across New Zealand. I mean, I've literally lost track of how many of these projects are.
Well, that's fantastic. And this is from, say, Kaitaia to Gore, or in Chicago.
Absolutely. Each little town has, particularly some of these rural towns where it's looking like they're in decline. People, have become quite invested in coming up with innovative ideas to save their town, or if not sort of necessarily kind of grow and raise the profile of their town, make their towns a really good place to live for the people who are there. So it really has been about starting to forge a sense of shared identity, a sense of collectivism, a sense of collective investment in kind of the value of these towns. And then some it might be handcrafts, some it might be wine, some it might be local attractions, some it might be protecting a waterway. Some, like in Oamaru, they've got the Victorian Festival, so it's making the most of their beautiful old architecture. So in all of these little towns around New Zealand, you've had these groups of people who are just really coming together around something that is a shared value or interest or attraction of their town. So it's from the real basic, starting to clean up waterways, doing riparian planting, doing clean-up, picking up litter, food forests, community gardens, and farmers markets. And so it's sort of right up the whole spectrum to actually creating attractions, creating festivals, creating areas of interest or innovative business themes that give the town a sense of identity together, but also attract other people in as well. So it's sort of really about growing the best of us on all these multiple levels, I think, is part of really mitigating this traumatic contractual decline that we're in collectively.
Yes, well, if you go to Tirau, which is between Cambridge and Putaruru, you will find it's a corrugated iron town. They've got gigantic buildings made of corrugated iron, large sheep, a large dog. They've got, it's very, very creative. And they turned a declining town around. This is over the last 25 to 30 years or more. And it's a tourist attraction because it's on the main road between Wellington and Auckland, the main highway. Lots of people now stay and have food. It's a great food eating place because it's about, 2.5 to 3 hours out of Auckland going south. And so here was a very, very smart and savvy person or persons who decided to make the architecture of so many of the buildings out of animals. It stops people. And so it's a little town was just a village that's got itself on the map. And we need these people up and down the country. I mean, with Maori having a big pā or marae complex at Te Hana, north of Wellsford. That's a good idea. But again, we've got to get people in behind them to support them. But could you carry on, Anneleise, because we need to hear of so many of the good things that we don't read in the press or see on TV or hear on the radio.
Well, I think that so I've just been to a couple of meetings in Littleton lately. I moved away for a while, and so I've come back, and it's quite a different town to when I left. The earthquake real estate was tight because there was quite a lot of damage, and it's taken quite a while for Littleton to come back. So one of the things that people are talking about now is affordable housing. It used to be quite a mix, but when towns start to take off, does it start under the current situation we're in? It can start to push people out the bottom. When things get desirable, they get more expensive, and so they start to become sort of a little bit self-selecting as to how they regenerate, which is up to who can afford to and who can't. So some of the conversations that are being having in Littleton is, how do we create community-based affordable housing? How do we start re-examining the idea of commonly held land, commonly held resources, community-held resources? And a really exciting project that's happening in Littleton is a commercial development of quite a major site in the main street. And so the company that's doing it wants to look at, how do we do commercial development differently? How do we do it so that it's a returning investment to community and becomes a community investment? So the person who's bought the land has basically been going through a community consultation process as to what amenities and what development the community would like to see on that land. And so it's evolved to quite a fairly detailed brief, which has now been put out to an architectural competition to just do some sketches of, well, what might that look like, and then the winning one will kind of move forward with designing this property. But it's basically the community decided that they wanted this multi-use attraction property with like Roman baths, with eateries, a cinema, apartment accommodation for visitors, and it'll be on this nice corner site in the heart of Littleton in London Street. And so that will go out to crowdfunding, a little bit like what happened with the Hikarangi project in Rurotoria, where it was crowdfunding investors who will then have shares in the eventual company.
Grand idea.
Once it's producing. And then so it's continually paying back these dividends to community investors. So instead of being the usual, the developer gets the profit and sells it off, the ownership is retained in community shareholders. So it differs from a co-op, and it's not kind of worker-owned. So it's community-owned. So the first shares will be launched with a view to attracting people who live or have a personal interest in Littleton. So
I'm speaking with Anneleise Hall, and she's from Diamond Harbour and Banks Peninsula, talking about community localisation and investments in social capital.
It's a way for it to be across multiple smaller shareholders, but providing an ongoing investment in your community and the amenities in your community. And I think some of the other things that are exciting that were happening in Littleton is just some of the partnerships with council, where for some of the community swimming pool had lifeguards who were time beat members who were on a roster, and community people were able to purchase a season holder key to use the pool over summer. So it sort of meant that season was extended, and it was sort of run by the community for the community, and has retained a really important asset in that community through looking at how can it be done different. So this is where I think that there's a lot of scope for visionary councils for sort of really looking at those levels of partnership from top down to bottom up, and how they can be really mutually reinforcing for the greatest benefit, and perhaps even cut out some of those middle levels of money just sort of getting siphoned off where it doesn't really necessarily need to. So what investment is being put into the community is being maximised into the assets, not necessarily in layers of management. And I think one thing I'm really adamant that is quite a crisis for humanity at the moment is really our mental health. We've been bombarded with years and years of this declining civility, of an apparent diminishment of our values, and some have been modelled by high levels of leadership, where we're having divisiveness, where we're having outright lies, propaganda, where we're being dominated by this rhetoric of fear and marginalising particularly poor or ethnic minorities. Poverty's been really demonised as kind of the fault of those who are suffering from it. However, it's a manufactured condition when we're in a world where you need this constant growth and there's nowhere to pull it from. Now it's being pulled from the bottom layers of our people. It's got to be extracted from somewhere, and So the levels of depression, the levels of violence, we have bullying from our highest levels of leadership, overt bullying, you know. I look at some of the kind of the gaslighting and the discourse coming from high levels of leadership of various political factions around the world. And you look at it like a power and control wheel, or a kind of a blueprint of an abuser, of a violent abuser. I mean, you're seeing those behaviours mirrored in the way some of our leadership is treating people. So, I mean, obviously you're getting these levels of anxiety, of depression, of real trauma in our communities. I mean, who can look at a photo of a little boy being washed up on a beach and not feel some level of trauma witnessing that image at the deepest levels of humanity? And then we see, of course, the real divisiveness when some people are quite gleeful about that and think they deserve to die. And, you know, I don't think that that's our natural human condition. I think
definitely
we have
not.
People carrying that level of real disconnection from the suffering of others. You know, we start to have this kind of sociopathic kind of thread running through, you know, our social fabric, and that's really, really harmful. And so, and there's no real getting away from it in this high communication, high visibility world that we're in. So as much as these community projects and these things are so important as connection points and ways of us to work together, I think that there's a deeper level where we really need to have some sort of connection with our values, with what we believe is morally right and decent, and really powerfully stand in that. To build some of these other things that we need to kind of keep our world from becoming unviable for human life, I think our relationships with ourselves and each other and our world, that fundamental healing of that trauma and that violence is really the deeper level of that we still really struggle to talk about. I mean, we've been through this enormous period that's just been so sort of tense and groundbreaking with Me Too and Time's Up, and it's been brewing for quite a number of years. I think it sort of started on a level with Occupy. You know, the whole Occupy movement was sort of about, well, we're not going to take it anymore, we've had enough, and it was sort of like this financial abuse. But this financial abuse is the tip of an iceberg of not valuing some humans, you know, of feeling some humans are throwaway or are exploitable. So there's this level of lack of empathy or violence just even threaded through our systems, you know, these dominant power structures. You know, workplace bullying is rife. I mean, there's been a number of studies recently that show that people who have psychopathic profiles or semi-psychopathic profiles are more likely to succeed in corporate management positions, you know. So what we have is this world where the more you don't care about the damage you're doing or who you're hurting, the more you get rewarded. So we need to somehow turn that on its head, you know. We've got such terrible levels of domestic violence and youth suicide and sexual abuse, and that's our Achilles heel. I mean, how can we really thrive as a society, and how can we maximise our potential, and how can we lift everybody up if we're still allowing these hidden, secret, nasty, damaging things to be occurring and really undermining our people on these really basic levels? I mean, if we don't feel that we have opportunity, if we don't have self-esteem, if we don't believe in ourselves, if we don't feel empowered, then we're much more likely to contribute to this, or we're unable to contribute really to building this world we need to build. So it's quite a handbrake on our potential.
Very much so. Very much so.
I'm really excited to see the emergence of the Me Too.
Me too.
Type movement.
Me too.
But what still really worries me is that, you know, we've had some of these stories coming out. We've had very little in New Zealand about people being exposed, and I don't really think it's about, and I hate the word witch hunt, because really witch hunt was about a heap of innocent women getting persecuted and burnt, and it was really
horrible.
Again about power, reinforcing a kind of a certain power paradigm, and I don't think that's what's happening with Me Too, because I think the people who are the victims, are the people who traditionally haven't had the power. So it's kind of quite a way of putting it that I think really subverts something that was powerful and damaging to women. But personally, I think that our own healing is just got to be really at the complete foundation, this reconnection with values. We deserve to have a world where children are safe, where children can thrive, where children have food in their bellies, where children have the support of the village, where we support each other with the support of the village, where if we know someone's homeless or starving, we don't blame them, we help them. But these levels of violence and abuse, and the fact that our courts, that so few people actually get held accountable and convicted, it is a real scourge. And until we can have these mature conversations, and I think that the church, probably another example where people get paid hush money and it's all quietened up. And again, the last government wanting to sweep an inquiry into abuse in state care under the carpet and not address any of those issues. I mean, if we've been abusing over 60% of our state wards by people who are being paid taxpayers' money and are raping and beating children for the last 60 years, don't we need to know how the hell that happened and who those people are and whether they've still got any power in the system or whether they're working with children? And if we're taking children off their families, shouldn't we be giving them a much better foundation and framework for having a healthy, powered life rather than pretty much setting them up to go straight to prison?
Yes, we certainly do.
And if that's what's happening at our state system, then that's a macrocosm of what's happening in our homes. And it's really hard to talk about. I mean, where does one start? But really, I think it's about caring about your neighbours, knowing who your neighbours are,
yes,
being kinder and more compassionate and willing to listen and willing to, instead of marginalise and blame or write people off because they look scary or dodgy or unfed or a bit dirty or whatever, actually care about other people's stories. We've all got these stories, and when we can actually open our hearts and connect with other people's on an empathetic and on a basic level of humanity, of you matter because you're alive, because you're a human being, but maybe you haven't had all the breaks that I've had, or you haven't had it easy as I've had, or you haven't had the wraparound support around you, or you've had terrible, terrible things happen to you that have shaped the way that you relate to other people in the world. And it's not because you're a bad or a horrible or a human, it's because we have an environment that has brought out the worst in you, not the best. And how do we change that together? Because we really need to, if we're going to create this more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, we actually have to be working at our highest level of potential, which means bringing everyone along and lifting people up and not having these terrible secrets and not blaming people for the crimes that are perpetuated against them. And
well, can I speak to that? You see, I worked, many listeners will have heard this, I've worked 8 electronic doors deep in maximum security prison here at Paurimo here in Auckland. And I was hanging out inside there with all the worst of the worst. And when I talk to them, you will find that, one, they were not brought into the world from love. They were brought into the world as a result of booze and drugs. And then all of a sudden the mother finds she's pregnant, and 9 months later she's having a baby. But where's the father? The father's gone. And this is something that we've got to really have a look at. There are not enough males standing up and saying, right, I'm responsible for that. I want to get in and support that situation. There's a little baby there that needs all the aroha, all the love. And I think this is imperative that we acknowledge this, because children that are coming into the world are not being brought into the world by love. And what do we do about that? And then there's one other thing that I want to be able to drop in. Most of my friends, just about all my friends, adhere to the idea that we are spiritual beings having an earth experience. It means that you can be Christian, you can be Buddhist, you can be Hindu, Taoist, but we are actually, there's an essence in the human species. And that's been discontinued. The church has failed completely when it comes to soul. And so with the church walking away from its responsibility to give us some sort of ethical or moral or principled charter in which to lead our lives, there is nothing now. There is no talk of a higher purpose with children. And so they think, well, you know what? Guess what? When we die, we're dead, got nothing to worry about, so let's get in there and get what we can, do what we can, and who cares? But this is this whole other thing about, wow, why is it that the great religions who have, in this particular time period, they have actually become what I would say lost themselves on the journey as well. But way back there is a underlying character that all human beings have a connection to a greater being. We don't know what that greater being is, and yet the conversations today across just about every country, particularly in the Western world, they don't talk about a soul, and they don't talk about there's far more potential. You know, we're only using maybe 5% of our whole potential as a human being. So there are many, many things, Anneleise, that we have to start to relook at it, and one of the things is that we essentially, some people have come up, told me and said, you know what, Tim, New Zealand's parliament is essentially full of atheists or agnostics, and so they don't really have any care for the future solely because they know that when they die, they're dead. So there's another huge component to existence around this. And yes, I agree with you. When a baby is born into this world, we have to have loving parents, but we have to make sure that the baby comes into the world because it's wanted. I came across a friend who's working with the dispossessed, the broken-hearted, the lost people. She was dealing with a male who had 25 children to 5 different women. And if you tracked all those 25 children and see where they are today, it would be a horror story. And so there is a huge challenge for us here in this country to lift up the bottom layer of people and get everybody growing food in their back garden is a very good way to start, because they know what they're putting into the ground and they know what they're putting into their body. And
well, I don't think that's... See, there's a problem in itself, is with our housing insecurity, people growing food in their back garden is just not a reality for so many of those people that need it. This is why, you know, we've really... Some of the solutions that seem easy actually just aren't really the most effective. It really is around bringing back that sense of being a whole village, you know. Not everyone should have food in their garden, but maybe there needs to be enough in the community wide. And,
yes.
And maybe some people who are in that level of unwellness or dealing with their own issues. I mean, I know from being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse myself and living with post-traumatic stress, we don't talk about post-traumatic stress yet. We have huge levels of violence and sexual violence. So it's a hidden epidemic. People like me are invisible in our communities, yet the level of suffering that we go through and debilitation in our lives can be quite high, yet no one would know. We're invisible. So I think about people who don't even have the resources and haven't built some of the structures in their life that I have, of trying to actually just even get to that first step of believing that they're worth anything, let alone trying to grow food in their garden, let alone, you know, trying to be effective parents. We've got generational cycles where people have been through violence, addiction. You know, it really comes down to love. It really comes down to compassion. It really comes down to connection and having safe places and being embraced by our communities, just on that very first level. I mean, you know, we have groups like Women's Refuge and the Aunties. You know, we've got these groups called the Aunties that have popped up to help victims of domestic violence.
It's
and
very
they
good.
They give them, you know, they don't, it's not just other people's throwaways. They give them new things. They treat them like they're precious.
Yes.
It might be for some of those women the first time they've ever felt like they're worth it and they're precious, and it's all about them. You know, and we get this, particularly with our prison system, we get people saying about your experiences before, or lock them up, throw away the key, you know, put a bullet in them or whatever. But what most people can't relate to or accept is that some of these, particularly men, because it's, you know, harder to have sympathy for these, you know, aggressive-looking men, but some of these men, you know, were 4 or 5 or 6-year-old beautiful, beautiful little boys that were being viciously and violently abused, and that was
yes.
what they knew.
Yes.
You know, and that child is still that broken child has formed the angry man, and as a victim myself, I have to stand in between this bigger vision that I have of recognising that there's a part of those men who are scary and, who, I can relate to more as an abuser that is also mirroring me and that damaged child. So I think that, it's very easy to draw these polarities and go, you're not like me at all. But, when we look really deeply at our humanity, who hasn't had some example in their life where they've felt left out or bullied or, and they might have stood up for themselves, they may have got over it, they may be a high flyer or whatever now. But their level of resilience for overcoming that adversity, that level of sense of self-worth, of strength, that hasn't been depleted by having no good role models or nowhere safe or no one in your life that ever told you you're worth anything, And every single time we have one of those people, one of those angels, and everyone can be those angels, whether it's for the kid down the road or the old lady next door who's lonely or whatever, we can reach out from our heart and go, you're worth this moment of my time and my undivided attention and my heart connection in this moment because you are, because you exist. And the amount of times in my life where I've felt like I'm at the edge of my tether and it might just be a librarian or someone at the supermarket that'll have a moment of talking with me and where I'm not invisible, where they smile and where it meets their eyes and where in that moment you feel that level of connection. Those things, every single one of them is like air. It gives us those little bits of resilience, and the more we have those, the more they build up and the more resilient we are. But what we have to remember is these people that we call our lowest or whatever people in our society have been people that have had it kicked out of them over and over and over and over again, and they do not have that resilience and they do not have those resources. And how do we grow that? And not all people who are victimised go on to be offenders, obviously. It's usually a small proportion, but you can guarantee that the people who are worst offenders have had, for the most part, horror in their lives, that they've never overcome and they've never learnt the resources to do anything different. So, how we start solving these problems of our depression and our suicide and our incarceration and these longer-term problems of why are so many people falling out the bottom is we actually need to really care about them as people.
But we also need to have a national conversation about this, because when it's all said and done, there is pedophilia right through New Zealand's society, right to the highest of our society. And if they ignore it because they're protecting their back, this is why it doesn't trickle down, where we stop this at all the lower levels. We have to have a national conversation around this. And it's going to be very difficult to be able to get one, solely because you won't get politicians and business people, etc., at the higher echelons wanting it. And so the underbelly of New Zealand has to be exposed to the light. And I appreciate your consistency on this, Anneleise, that we have got all these children coming into the world. We want to make sure that they are loved and they are perfectly safe and that they've got trust. And finally, that if you can ask these children, what do you think of your mum? What do you think of your dad? If you can get a 13-year-old girl and say, well, what about your dad? Do you like your dad? Oh, I love my dad. My dad is so good to me. And we have a lot of fun, and all my friends love him too. This is what the conversation we want to hear, is how many children really love their parents and particularly love their dad.
Well, it's not even about that, I don't think. It's about the fact that until we have conviction rates, until we have help for people, until we recognise that the people that are doing this have actually been really damaged and never got the help they need themselves. And it's about men standing up and being positive role models. It's about men not perpetuate, not laughing at rape jokes, or not, if their mates are standing around making women uncomfortable, calling them out. I mean,
Yes.
It's seeing people and people being inappropriate around children, believing children, not forcing children to hug people they don't want to, respecting children's bodily autonomy, but not living in fear. But we do have to recognise that the people that are harming people are people who are damaged themselves, and we can't lock them up and throw away the key. Most of them get out, as Nigel last said. There's only the few of the few that are so damaged that there's no hope. But, until we actually start looking at, not criminalising things that aren't really criminal and aren't harming people, and putting some of these, sidetracking some of those resources into actually genuinely trying to look at the problems and what people need to get well, we're just going to have this systemic kind of perpetuation of this damage, because we're not convicting people, we're not helping them, we don't have counselling available.
I hear you clearly.
If we look at 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys getting abused, those people are either going to grow up to be addicts, get ill, get mentally ill, be suicidal, or be offenders, you know?
Yes. 1 male in 6 and 1 female in 3 are abused. This has to be front page news in New Zealand. It has to be on TV. This is a very, very horrible, terrible, horrific statistic.
And certainly, I would really encourage people who are interested in what this is doing to our society and looking at why we've got so many of the problems we have, to look at the ACE study, ACE, capital ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. It is, I think that's groundbreaking, that study, and it really needs to form how we view working with people and lifting them up.
Thank you, Anneleise. I'm actually doing a interview next week. I've already done the interview of a child that was abused from 3 years of age, and at 47 he's been able to come back and he's now healing. And it just proves the point. If there's love can come in and support. So, that goes next week.
And
so
we can all be those angels.
Too right.
Yes. It's love. Yes. Healing is through love and right relationship.
Thank you. Anneleise, thank you for sharing your heart. Thank you for telling us what we can do. And I just trust that communities can come together, people can come together, so that we can heal this horrible lower level and bring children basically into light and into love. I just want to say thank you very much for being here with me today.
Oh, thank you, Tim. And I really think it's about all of us coming together and loving and supporting each other right from every age.
Yes. Oh, good. Well, thank you.
The compassion revolution.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much. I look forward to speaking to you maybe in a year or two's time again, so that we can see how many more changes for the positive have come into being.
Awesome. Okay, you're welcome.
Okay.
Thank you for asking me.
Right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, Tim.
Bye-bye. That was Anneleise Hall. Decide to network. Use every letter you write, every conversation you have, every meeting you attend, every email you send. And remember, even Facebook. To tweet and to express your fundamental beliefs and dreams. Affirm to others the vision of the world you want. Network through thought. Network through action. Network through love. Network through the spirit. You are the center of a network. You are the center of the world. You are a free, immensely powerful source of life and goodness. Affirm it, spread it, radiate it. Think day and night about it, and you will see a miracle happen. The greatness of your own life in a world of big powers, media and monopolies, but of 7.6 billion individuals, networking is the new freedom, the new democracy, a new transparency, and a new form of wholeness and happiness. This originated by Dr. Robert Muller, Chancellor of the World Peace University in Costa Rica, Central America. I invite you to be able to come to greenplanetfm.com, where we have over 400 interviews in our database, which you can readily download and listen to. to be able to inspire yourself to become the change you want to see in the world. And become involved in caring for your children and grandchildren's future. We are also on Facebook, on Green Planet FM and ourplanet.org.